Hey up again folks, and welcome back to this series where we dissect the 1810 conversation between John Tellwright and Ralph Lee, as recorded in the book The Borough of Stoke-on-Trent by John Ward. This conversation, recorded in the glorious old North Staffordshire dialect, which would later become the Potteries dialect, is full of historical titbits, and there's loads more to unpack. In previous episodes we looked at the story of Molly Lee and the story of Ralph Shaw. So what are they talking about today? Well, let's head back to the Turk Shed pub in Boslem and have a listen in. That were a queer trick, were it not, a Rafie Dennell's? Dun you mean Gozer is going France? Or has Harry gotten work ice there, and Harry said how they did the wear? I mean him finding eyetight to what they made their mouths. That were a fausse trick for sartin, and a great use to trade, but what a blunder the mester's ear made when he sent him word about it. I just mean, Rafie, I'm not properly incensed on it. Why, you seen as how they get the plaster stone from Derbyshire a rate. But then, instead of first grinding it down and baking it into dust like flour, and using dust with water for cast models as they called 'em, mesters had the raw stone cut into shapes and trade for mac things out on 'em, but they couldn't. I think at last they sent 'em full word of how to do it. So if you've watched this series so far, you'll know that the time period that Ralph and John are recollecting is the mid-18th century, which was a time of innovation and significant change in the region that would later become known as the Staffordshire Potteries. This time period saw many innovations that had transformed the face of ceramics, but not all were invented locally. In some ways, Staffordshire was still behind other regions of the globe where the pottery industry was thriving. Their methods were becoming outdated in a rapidly modernising industry. In the last episode, we discussed how one man tried to patent a design that he claimed to have invented, but was actually a variation of an existing method, that was in turn modelled on an imported Chinese ware. This trend for foreign methods influencing the local pottery industry in revolutionary ways would continue, as attested to in this episode's topic of discussion. Now this is a topic that's quite close to home for me, because my family's had direct experience of this innovation. Here's a photo of my great-grandfather in his capacity of chief mould maker at Gladstone Pottery. This photograph was probably taken sometime in the 1930s. Even more remarkable is that very room photographed can actually still be accessed at the Gladstone Pottery Museum, and it's very authentically preserved. So as you could probably guess, the topic of this week's snippet of conversation is how the art of making moulds was revolutionised in the 18th century. The man who's credited with doing this is one Ralph Daniel, who's referred to as Rafie Dennell in the conversation. Now he was a man of broad horizons who travelled over to France to learn more about his trade. The story goes that sometime in the mid-1740s, Rafie took the bold journey across the English Channel, where the porcelain trade had already begun to outpace the old methods of Staffordshire. There he ended up in a workhouse at some point, and he saw something remarkable. The way in which potters cast their moulds in France was completely different to how it was done back home. Back home, moulds were usually made from heavy clay, or sometimes stone such as alabaster. These moulds lacked detail at first, and carving out of solid stone was a really arduous process. But in France he discovered a more streamlined method of how to do it. The French didn't just carve out of stone and hope for the best. What they did was take the stone, grind it down to a fine dust, and then mixed it with water to form a paste which could be poured into an existing model. This allowed moulds to be mass-produced, because the plaster of Paris, as we now know it, would harden quickly, and could be easily distributed. This method is what would become known as slip casting later on, and it was certainly still in use in the 20th century. My great-grandfather and later my grandfather would probably use this very method. Now, unlike Ralph Shaw in the previous episode, Ralph Daniel was more than happy to bring this secret back home and share it amongst his fellow potters. To demonstrate, he cast a large table plate using this new method and showed it to the other potters up in Burslem, and explained how it could revolutionise their industry. Now, despite this demonstration, they actually got the wrong idea at first, as attested to in the conversation. They sourced the right kind of stone, which is sulphate of lime, also called gypsum, which is abundant in Derbyshire around the Chellaston area. But in their eagerness, they sourced this new stone, but continued using the old method of just trying to carve the mould straight out of it, and it proved as difficult and tedious as ever, and many of them were probably wondering what all the fuss was about. But nonetheless, Ralph Daniel would come to the rescue once again, and according to Ralph Lee in the conversation, he sent them the proper word of how to do it step by step. and this method would really take off. So this conversation yet again proves to be a really rich resource for first-hand accounts of how the pottery industry changed in the 18th century, and through all these little anecdotes we reveal a little bit more about the revolutions that were going on at the time. This would pave the way for future methods of mass production, as the region really became a powerhouse for the ceramics industry in the 19th century. Not bad for a thing that Rafe Lee described as a fausse trick. It proved to be a pretty good trick, and helped the Staffordshire Potteries take another great leap forward. So that about wraps it up for this episode. Thanks for joining us again, and as ever I will continue this series because there is a lot more to unpack in this conversation as it goes on for several more pages, so don't forget to join me in the Turk shed next time, and we'll see what Rafe and John are talking about then. Thanks once again for watching. If you're enjoying it, please don't forget to like, share and subscribe so that the channel can grow. Ta very much for watching, and I'll say thee again next time.